Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day today. In this video, we're going to discover what happens when Quỳnh slowly begins to notice Thanh getting closer and closer to Thắm, while a dangerous secret starts growing quietly behind their backs. Can love survive when suspicion, pressure, and hidden manipulation begin tearing two people apart from the inside? Stay with us until the end to see how everything starts to change in ways no one expected. And if you enjoy emotional drama stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next videos. The heat from the melon field stayed trapped against Tham's skin long after she and Quỳnh returned home that evening. And even though the sky above the village had already darkened into deep shades of blue and gray, the air surrounding the small wooden house still felt unbearably heavy. During the walk home, Thắm had quietly glanced over her shoulder several times without explaining why, each movement subtle enough that Quỳnh barely noticed. The narrow dirt road stretching behind them remained empty every single time she looked. Yet the strange feeling inside her chest refused to disappear. It felt as though someone had been following them ever since they left the field. Beside her, Quỳnh continued talking about work in the calm, hopeful voice she loved hearing the most. Ever since he received the new project from his company, something inside him had started changing. For the first time in months, he no longer sounded trapped beneath endless exhaustion. He talked about earning more money, repairing the house before the rainy season arrived, and saving enough so that Thắm would not have to continue standing under the burning sun selling things every single day. He even joked softly about building a small vegetable garden someday with chickens running around the yard while they sat outside eating watermelon together in the evenings. Thắm smiled whenever he looked at her, but deep inside, her thoughts remained tangled in the same unsettling fear she could not explain. By the time they reached home, darkness had completely settled across the countryside. The small house trapped the summer heat inside its thin walls, making the room feel suffocating despite the old ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. The fan produced a weak clicking sound every few seconds while pushing warm air around the room without truly cooling anything. Quỳnh looked exhausted after spending the entire afternoon helping prepare the melon garden beneath the brutal heat. Sweat still clung to his shirt even after washing his face, and not long after dinner, he fell asleep almost immediately on the thin mattress beside the window. One of his hands rested loosely near Thắm, as though even while sleeping, he still wanted to stay close to her. But Thắm could not sleep at all. She remained sitting quietly near the doorway, staring into the darkness outside, while distant insect sounds echoed softly across the silent village. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once, before everything became quiet again. Thắm slowly wrapped her arms around herself and leaned back against the wooden wall, trying once again to convince herself that she was simply tired. Maybe the unbearable heat had made her overly sensitive. Maybe the strange feeling inside her chest came from her uncomfortable encounter with Thanh earlier that day. At first, she truly believed Thanh only wanted to repay her kindness after she once helped him. But recently, his attention had started lingering too long. The way he looked at her whenever she spoke. The way he always seemed to appear near her stall unexpectedly. The way he insisted on helping even after she politely refused several times. None of it felt openly threatening, yet somehow it still created a pressure she could no longer ignore. Her thoughts drifted back to the moment earlier that afternoon when Thanh, once again, tried to offer her a ride home. She still remembered the discomfort she felt whenever he stepped closer each time she tried to step away. She remembered forcing herself to remain polite even while her fingers tightened nervously around the basket she carried. But more than anything else, she remembered the overwhelming relief that flooded through her body the moment Quỳnh appeared at the end of the road. Just seeing him there had instantly made her feel safe again. Thắm slowly turned toward Quỳnh, sleeping peacefully beside her now. Even while asleep, he still looked tired. Since receiving the new project, he had been leaving earlier every morning and returning home later every night, determined to finally create a better future for both of them. Yet despite all the pressure resting on his shoulders, he still smiled every time he talked about their future together. Thinking about those simple dreams made Tham's chest ache softly, because the last thing she wanted was to become another burden while he was already struggling so hard alone. Suddenly, a faint sound outside interrupted her thoughts, and Thắm froze instantly. At first, she thought it was only the wind brushing against the bamboo fence outside the house. But a few seconds later, she heard it again, softer this time. Careful footsteps moving slowly across the dry dirt near the front door. Her breathing stopped completely. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Slowly, Thắm stood up, without making a sound, while Quỳnh remained asleep behind her, completely unaware. She carefully walked toward the front door, while listening closely to every movement outside. The old wooden floor creaked softly beneath her feet, forcing her to pause several times before taking another step. Her heartbeat grew louder with every second. Then she heard another sound, closer this time. Thắm hesitated for a brief moment before finally reaching toward the door, her fingers trembling slightly as she slowly pulled it open, just enough to look outside. Darkness. The narrow dirt path in front of the house stretched empty beneath pale moonlight, while the trees moved gently in the wind, creating shifting shadows across the ground. Somewhere far away near the main road, the faint sound of a motorcycle engine echoed through the night. But despite seeing no one outside, the terrifying feeling inside her chest only became stronger. For several long seconds, Thắm continued staring into the darkness, as though expecting someone to suddenly step out from behind the trees at any moment. The warm summer air suddenly felt cold against her skin. Then, without warning, a stronger gust of wind swept through the yard, causing the bamboo fence nearby to shake loudly. Thắm gasped softly and immediately stepped backward before quickly shutting the door again. The sound woke Quỳnh almost instantly. "Thắm?" he asked sleepily while slowly sitting up. "What happened?" Thắm forced herself to calm down before answering quietly, "I thought I heard something outside." Quỳnh rubbed his face tiredly before glancing toward the door. probably just the wind," he murmured softly. "You've been under the sun too long today. You're overthinking." He reached for her hand gently and pulled her back down beside him. Even exhausted, his touch still carried warmth and reassurance that slowly loosened some of the fear trapped inside her chest. "Come sleep," he whispered quietly. Tham nodded, though the uneasy feeling inside her still had not disappeared. Meanwhile, across the village beneath a dim streetlight near the empty roadside, Thanh sat alone inside his parked car with the engine already turned off. One hand rested tightly around the steering wheel, while the other pressed against his forehead, as though trying to calm the thoughts crowding inside his mind. No matter how hard he tried, he could not stop replaying the same images from earlier that day. Tham stepping away from him. Tham lowering her eyes nervously whenever he stood too close. And worst of all, the way her entire expression softened with relief the moment Quỳnh appeared beside her. Thanh leaned back heavily against the seat and closed his eyes. At first, he truly believed he only wanted to help her. He knew how difficult her life was. He knew she spent every day walking beneath the brutal summer sun, carrying heavy baskets, while pretending she was stronger than she really was. Watching her struggle had awakened something protective inside him. But now, even he was beginning to question whether that feeling had already become something deeper. His phone suddenly vibrated in the darkness. The older woman. Thanh stared silently at the screen for several seconds before finally answering. "You still haven't gone home?" she asked calmly. "No," Thanh replied quietly. A brief silence followed before the woman spoke again, slower this time, more deliberate. "You met Tham again today, didn't you?" Thanh lowered his eyes. "Yes." "And?" He hesitated briefly before answering honestly. "She looked happy with Quỳnh." The older woman let out a cold breath. "Happy?" she repeated softly. "Do you really think happiness is enough to survive reality?" Thanh remained silent, while the woman continued speaking in a colder voice. "She spends every day under the burning sun, just to survive. She lives inside that tiny house and still pretends she's satisfied because she's already used to suffering. Girls like her stop expecting better things after a while." Than's grip around the steering wheel slowly tightened. "She deserves stability," the woman whispered carefully, "not empty promises from a man who can barely build a future for himself." And for the first time that night, Thanh did not argue back, because somewhere deep inside him, dangerous thoughts had already begun growing quietly in the dark. The next morning arrived with heavy summer sunlight pouring across the village long before most people had fully woken up. And even though Quỳnh barely slept, after staying up late reviewing documents for his new project, he still forced himself out of bed before sunrise. The small house remained quiet, except for the sound of dishes softly clinking together, while Tham prepared a simple breakfast near the kitchen corner. Dark circles had formed faintly beneath Quỳnh eyes, but he still smiled the moment he looked at her, as though seeing her first thing in the morning somehow made the exhaustion easier to endure. Tham tried to smile back naturally, yet the uneasy feeling from the previous night still lingered somewhere deep inside her chest. She had eventually fallen asleep close to dawn, but even then, her rest had been shallow and restless, interrupted constantly by the sensation that someone had been standing outside the house, watching them through the darkness. Quinn noticed her silence almost immediately, while buttoning his work shirt near the doorway. "You still look tired," he said softly, before stepping closer to touch her forehead lightly. "Maybe you should rest today, instead of going out to sell." Thắm quickly shook her head and forced a small smile. "I'm fine. You should worry about your project instead." Quinn studied her face for several seconds, as though he wanted to ask more questions, but eventually he only nodded quietly. He already carried too many worries in his mind. The project he had finally been trusted with was far bigger than anything he had handled before. And despite how hopeful he sounded the previous night, deep down, he understood that one mistake could destroy the opportunity completely. Before leaving, he gently fixed a loose strand of hair behind Tham's ear and reminded her to stay out of the sun whenever possible. The simple gesture made her chest ache softly because even while drowning beneath pressure himself, he still thought about her first. After Quinn finally disappeared down the narrow dirt road leading toward town, the house suddenly felt strangely empty. Thắm remained standing near the doorway for a long moment, watching the distant road while the morning wind moved slowly through the trees around the yard. Something about the silence unsettled her again. She could not explain why. Eventually, she forced herself to continue with her routine and carried her baskets toward the marketplace like every other day. By late morning, the heat had already become unbearable. Sweat soaked through the back of her shirt, while the crowded roadside buzzed with endless voices, passing motorcycles and the sound of people bargaining loudly beneath colorful umbrellas stretched across the market entrance. Thám tried focusing only on work, hoping the busy atmosphere would distract her from the strange thoughts still lingering inside her head. For a while, it worked. But then she saw him again. Thám stood across the road near a tea stall, dressed neatly as always, speaking to someone on the phone, while occasionally glancing toward her direction. The moment their eyes briefly met, Thám immediately ended the call and walked toward her with the same calm expression he always carried. "You came early today," he said gently. Thám forced a polite smile while quietly tightening her grip around the basket beside her. "I always come around this time." Thám nodded before placing a cold bottle of water onto her table. "It's too hot today. You should drink something." Thám immediately shook her head. "You don't need to do that." "It's nothing," Thám replied softly. "You looked exhausted yesterday too." Thám lowered her eyes for a brief moment, clearly uncomfortable, but refusing too directly felt rude after he had already brought it. "Thank you," she said quietly. Thám smiled faintly before remaining there beside her stall longer than necessary. He asked simple questions at first. Had she eaten breakfast yet? Was Quinn busy with work now? Was the heat becoming too difficult lately? None of the questions sounded inappropriate, yet the longer he stayed there, the more uneasy Thắm became. What frightened her most was that Thanh never acted aggressive. He never raised his voice or forced conversations. He always spoke gently and offered help at exactly the right moments, making it difficult for her to react coldly without seeming unreasonable. Meanwhile, across town, inside a crowded office building, Quỳnh day had already begun collapsing, much earlier than expected. The meeting documents he carefully prepared overnight had somehow gone missing from the shared project folder that morning, forcing him to spend nearly 2 hours reorganizing everything, while several senior employees openly complained about the delay. Later, a partner company suddenly changed multiple important requirements without warning, even though the original agreement had already been approved days earlier. By lunchtime, Quỳnh could already feel a dangerous pressure building around him from every direction. Several co-workers who normally greeted him warmly now only exchanged strange glances whenever he walked past. It was subtle, but impossible not to notice. Something inside the company had shifted overnight, and Quỳnh could not understand why. Still, he forced himself to remain calm. This project meant too much to him. It was his chance to finally give Thắm a better life, and no matter how difficult things became, he refused to lose the opportunity so easily. While Quỳnh struggled silently at work, the older woman sat inside her small house, speaking quietly on the phone, with someone whose voice could not be heard clearly. A satisfied smile slowly appeared across her face before she finally ended the call and looked out toward the distant road leading into town. In her mind, pressure was the easiest way to destroy people. Love looked beautiful when life was peaceful, but once exhaustion, failure, and insecurity slowly entered the relationship, even strong feelings could begin breaking apart from within. She did not need to scream or threaten anyone directly. She only needed to create enough doubt, enough stress, enough emotional distance for everything else to collapse naturally on its own. Later that afternoon, after several exhausting hours at the market, Thắm finally began packing her remaining goods to return home. The heat still pressed heavily against the crowded roadside, while sunlight reflected harshly across the pavement. Just as she lifted one of the heavier baskets, Thanh immediately stepped forward. "Let me help you," he said quietly. "I can carry it myself," Thắm replied almost immediately, though her voice lacked confidence. Thanh still reached for the basket anyway, lifting it before she could stop him completely. "You've been standing under the sun all day," he said calmly. "At least let me help you carry this to the road." Thắm looked around nervously as several nearby vendors quietly watched the interaction with curious expressions. The pressure in her chest returned instantly. She took a small step backward, trying once again to create distance between them. But before she could say anything else, Thanh unscrewed the bottle of water he had bought earlier and held it out toward her. "Drink something first," he said softly. "You look pale." At that exact moment, a familiar figure appeared at the far end of the road. Quỳnh had just arrived after leaving work later than usual, exhaustion clearly visible across his face after the disastrous day he had endured. He stopped walking the instant he saw Thắm standing beside Tham's stall, holding the water bottle toward her while carrying one of her baskets in his other hand. Thắm immediately stepped backward the moment she noticed Quỳnh in the distance. But before she could call out to him, Quỳnh had already gone completely still. For several silent seconds, he simply stood there, watching them beneath the harsh afternoon sunlight, while something unfamiliar slowly tightened inside his chest. No one had technically done anything wrong. Thanh looked calm and respectful. Thắm herself had already moved away to create distance. Yet for the first time since meeting Thanh, a quiet feeling of uneasiness finally entered Quỳnh heart. And before Thắm even realized he had arrived, Quỳnh slowly turned around and walked away without saying a single word. After returning home from the melon field, Thắm begins feeling like someone is secretly watching her. But she hides her fear from Quỳnh as he struggles with the pressure of a major new project at work. Meanwhile, Thanh can't stop thinking about Thắm after seeing how safe and happy she looks beside Quỳnh. Influenced by the older woman's manipulative words, Thanh slowly starts believing that he may be the only person capable of giving Thắm a better future. As Quỳnh work suddenly becomes filled with strange problems and unexpected pressure, Thắm grows increasingly uncomfortable when Thanh keeps appearing near her market stall under the excuse of helping her. Everything becomes more complicated when Quỳnh arrives at the market after a terrible day at work and sees Thanh standing close to Thắm beneath the burning summer sun.